Hi there, everyone. Welcome, and thanks so much, Julian. It's such a joy to hang out with you and do and hang out with your friends and do this kind of stuff. So I'm really grateful for your intro and the opportunity to work with you all. So as Julian said, I remember the day I put my first piece of content out, my first blog, and which was well and truly over 10 years ago. And just the fear of having a voice, the fear of putting myself out there, the fear of having something to say and being wrong and what do people think, and maybe I get found out, maybe I'm not really, maybe I don't really know as much as I think I do. And today, as Julian said, won awards for my blogs and things like that. So what I'm going to do today is I've only got a short period with you, but I'm going to share with you what I think are 5 things that can perhaps help you if you're creating content. If you're in strategic comms or internal comms within an organisation, working with leaders, perhaps we do lots of that type of work. So I'm happy to answer questions on that as well. Some of these same principles apply. So Julian, you're going to keep an eye on the Q&A for me. So if you've got questions, pop them in there. Yes? All right. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Julian's going to tell me if there's anything wrong here. I'm just going to move that out of the way. Here we go. So today I want to talk about the catalyst content and 5 things that can really help you to create something, a piece of content that will help you really get cut through. So we've only just sent this to the publisher this week. It's the Catalyst Content book, which is how to create a world-class piece of, a world-class piece of content in less than 10 minutes. So yes, it is possible. And how this came about was because after writing a few books, as Julian said, this is my 7th book, I had a lot of people ask me, how do you create so much content? And so I started to sort of say, oh, well, just have a bit of a plan. And if you go away for a couple of days, lock yourself away, put this activity together, and you'll have a book by the end of a couple of days, it'll work. And I started to find that after a while, people would ask me, but then I'd follow them up and say, how did you go? Did you do it? And they'd say no. And I was like, okay, well, do you want me to help you? Do you want me to book the hotel? Like, do you want to come and I'll hold the space for you? So as a result, that's how this kind of started. But I'm really keen to find out what are the things that perhaps maybe hold you back from creating content, or maybe you work with leaders and execs in organizations and trying to help them create content for like intranet platforms and things like that. The things that I find that hold people back a lot, and I'd love for you to pop in the maybe in the Q&A area, Julian, which ones stand out to you. So the first thing that comes up for most people is that they really say, I'm just really not sure what to talk about. I've got so many ideas, or I have none. Somewhere on that scale, or I just don't know what I would even talk about. So that kind of comes up quite a lot. People just feel like they've got a bit of drawing blanks. The other one is time, just feeling like I haven't got enough time, or as in they take me a long time to do. Or if you're working with leaders within organisations, it could be that this is another thing to do on top of everything else. Like they're already struggling to have enough time to get everything done. Now we're going to do content on top of that, and not necessarily always seeing it as part of their leadership role. It feels like another thing that I don't have time for. So that was the second one. The third one that comes up is trying to translate content into cash. Now, if you work in the space of content marketing or you're creating content for yourself, maybe you're a consultant or maybe an expert in your space, do lots of work with experts, and they go, great, yeah, like it's really nice to create all this content, but at some point I'd really like to generate some revenue. So that's the third one that comes up a lot, and that frustration of, okay, I've put a content out and now I've got no sales. There's still no revenue coming in. So that one comes up a lot. Number 4 is a fear of adding to the noise, feeling like what could I possibly contribute that is new or different or unique, because I feel like everything has been said. So if I have something to say, I feel like I'm going to be spamming people. People already get enough newsletters, people already get enough social media. Why would I bother? So I don't know if that one comes up for you. And the last one, the big one that was for me, was the imposter syndrome. As I said, the fear of being found out, the fear of you know, what will people think of me? Maybe I don't know as much as I think I do. So I'm just going to stop for a second. Julian, you might help me have a look there as well. And I'm just going to see which ones came up the most. So let's have a look. I'm going to have a look in the...
Yeah, so what people are talking about, Jane, is that, you know, content takes time.
Takes time. Yeah, takes a lot of time. So feeling like it just takes forever. Okay, great. So that's probably the most popular one. I can't see, for some reason I can't see the Q&A. I can see chat, but that's okay. All right, cool. So big one is time. Okay. And this was the frustration that I had, and not only myself, but the people that I was working with, and to be able to have a formula and a framework to be able to do that quickly. But there are a few things to be aware of that you may, and I mean, I'm talking to comms people here, so there's a lot of these things you may be aware of. But a couple of things are that in 2015, $115 billion was spent on content marketing. In 2017, it was $135 billion, and it's expected by 2021 to be a $412 billion industry. So now this was before COVID as well. There's been a lot more content put out before with COVID on, but there's no secret it's not really going anywhere. And so the challenge that happens in this space is that I find that what happens is a lot of people sometimes start to outsource it, but outsource it perhaps to whether it's offshore, could be local. And the challenge is that it starts to create a lot more white noise. And so how do you get it to get cut through, and how do you get it to be unique and to connect, but still tap into the expertise of you or your experts? So business growth has changed as well. Like if you look at the old methods of business growth, in the past, it was all about cold calling, qualifying leads and sales demonstrations. So weren't they the good old days? Who's going, yay, they bring those days back. But today, the first question that when we're working with people to help them to build that content, the first question is, well, it's usually to drive revenue or engagement. And then the second question is, well, first of all, who do you know? Who are you connected to, and why does this matter? Because if we can work out who you know, then from there is now we can start to educate them, and then we can start to engage them. And if we've got those three things working, sometimes the old methodology sometimes can still work depending on some industries, but there's no doubt about it, this is a new business growth. In fact, this was an article that was in the Age newspaper that's back on 26th of March. You've got a lot of people, obviously, who have gone through being put down, terminated, made redundant, whatever it might be. And so you've got an even bigger rise in the gig economy. So personal branding was identified as one of the biggest job growth areas 5 years ago for the next 10 to 15 years. And this interview was with the CEO of Airtasker around how that's growing even more. So we're finding a lot more going on to Fiverr, Upwork, and people have different platforms now than they did back in the GFC to market themselves. And so, but the challenge is when you're in a space like that, how do you stand out? How do you create your value? But this big one, this one is quite interesting that I thought might be helpful for you to consider, is that social isolation, the research tells us that social isolation has led to a 60% increase in content consumption. You've probably already seen this. If you're looking at content that's being consumed, you may have noticed your open rate's much higher. We've got some clients who are back onto 2 newsletters a week. I have got one client who does 2 newsletters a day. And they got 18 new clients in the last 6 weeks. So depending on the industry, is that certainly people are craving information. They go to those people who they trust, as you know, and certainly that's the currency we're dealing with, is trust. So what I want to do is I want to quickly give you the few things that I find that make the biggest difference in getting that cut through. And I love this quote from Seth. As we said before, I interviewed Seth last year, and his quote is, and I love this, where he says, content marketing is the only marketing left, particularly if you're using content in a marketing space. So here's my 5. Well, actually, before I say that, is you probably know, I was chatting offline with Julian about newsletters and things like that before we jumped on. One thing that I find is a little bit forgotten with newsletters is the power of them for nurturing leads. And in fact, the research tells us that people spend about 47% more than anybody else and than unnurtured leads. And if you're in comms, you know this, but it's just a reminder, because I find when I work a lot with consultants, and this is the first thing that will drop off. So actually I'll go to, the first one is tribes. I'm just watching time. So the first one is having a tribe mindset and remembering that every one of us has a community of people around us that we can tap into. So if you haven't heard of Robin Dunbar, he wrote the book, How Many Friends Does One Person Need? And he said that we essentially have enough bandwidth for about 150 people. So one of the activities that I did a little while ago was with Sun Super. So I wrote the LinkedIn profiles for about 70 financial advisors in Sun Super, particularly when there was a change of legislation that happened and we needed to educate the market a little bit more. So what I did was I'd written the profiles, but I thought, you know, there's a real opportunity to educate the market a little bit more here with some really powerful content. So what I did was I asked them to run a webcast, and one in particular, and then to go out and share that with their networks. So as a result of that is that they got 500 new leads off their very first webcast. So it's really easy to sometimes default to sometimes, particularly if it's B2B, is sometimes some of the more traditional ways of marketing, sometimes using LinkedIn advertising and things like that. But I really encourage people, we do a lot of LinkedIn for organisations, and I really encourage people to don't forget about the networks of each of the individuals or the leaders or the people who have the networks in your business, and you can leverage them to be able to drive new growth. So that's the first one. So the first one is having a tribe mindset. The second one is people having ideas. So one of the things I find is that when I've worked with people, I spent 5 years as a productivity consultant with a company and a global productivity company. And the thing that I found that really held people back from really having an impact in their work was capturing their ideas. So they had really good ideas, but they just weren't that great at remembering them and having a home for them. And so, in fact, I found this recently where it said that 48.6, the average person has 48.6 thoughts per minute, which is 70,000 thoughts per day, which is a lot of thoughts. That's a lot. And so, but I find that people have great, really great ideas. They just come along at really bad times. So we don't always have homes for them. And so what I really encourage people to do is make sure that they have tools in place to do that. And I think of this lady, Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote the book Eat, Pray, Love, where she said, you know, ideas are like monkeys. They come along and they jump on your shoulder and then they jump away. And, you know, then they're gone. And she said, what you've got to do is you've got to grab that monkey by the tail and you've got to get it down. You've got to put it down somewhere. You've got to give it a home. So one of the tools that we developed, I developed it along with Dermot Crowley, the best-selling author of Smart Work. And we created a tool called Memo Mailer. So this tool, it's free. You can jump on iTunes and Google Play as well. But it really is designed to help you to capture ideas when they come along at those bad times. And you just simply talk into your phone. Now, you might have other ones like other dictation type apps and things like that. But this was really developed at the time, back when I was doing a lot of productivity work. And if you jump on, you'll see heaps of reviews and things. But essentially the idea is almost defragging your mind of ideas so that it sends you an email and you receive an email and it has your voice talking through. So if you have an idea, say for example, I've got to do a piece of content about, leading through change or something like that. So you just simply talk into it and it sends you an email without you having to, message yourself and all that sort of thing. So that may be useful for you, and it's really popular with a lot of the consultants that we work with and experts in their space who are having to come up with ideas all the time. So that's number two. So number one was having a tribe mindset, and number two was capturing your ideas. They're like monkeys, grab them before they jump away. The third one I'm going to give you is leverage. I love this picture. This cake cutter appeals to my sense of productivity. I've got a bit of a productivity obsession, but this beautiful picture of, just cut it once. You only have to put as much effort in once and you get all these pieces of the cake cut. And so I find when I'm working with people is that they will labour through content and pieces of content really heavily, and it takes them as a lot of effort, and it's because they're often doing a piece at a time and sort of cutting like a knife if they were doing them individually. So one of the things that I really encourage people to do is, if they're capturing their ideas really well, is we go through these three phases, which are ideation, creation and distribution. And so the ideation is done in a format that we capture the stories, the research, models, and the ideation process typically is where they, is where we've captured stories where they come along at really bad times. We make sure we've got Memo Mailer and we've got a list of things we're going to do. And the ideation, the piece of content that's unpacked, typically takes about 10 minutes to unpack. From there, they're sent off for creation. So somebody else will do, we may do the video or we may do the podcast, which is fine, but the distribution is outsourced. And so they're not doing it themselves. What we typically do is even have things like content creation boot camps, and we'll do about 52 pieces of these pieces of content in 2 days. So a year's worth of content in 2 days. And we have things like Content Club, where we do 10 pieces in 2 hours once a month, which works quite well as well. So you can get a lot done. And most people will say to me, I'll never look at 10 minutes the same way again. So you can get a lot done very quickly. And this is the process how I wrote all the books. Do my blogs every week and videos. So that's the third one. So the first one was a tribe mindset. The second one was capturing your ideas. And the third one is, if you get the idea, then you can create once and use often. So Julian, I'm just going to check in. Is any questions coming up that I need to jump into? Are we going okay?
It's all good. You've got them gripped. You just keep going.
Okay. All right, cool. I'm trying to give as much as I possibly can. So, I would not normally speak this fast. So, but to give you an example, even Emma McQueen. So Emma McQueen is a Melbourne-based business coach, and she wrote the book Go Getter in those 2 days. And so it is possible. She's got it out. You can jump on Amazon and places like that. So it definitely is possible to create world-class piece of content in less than 10 minutes. She did 52 of them and wrote a book out of it. So she unpacked all of that in 2 days. Took the 90 days to have it published, but the actual 2 days of getting everything out of her head and written was done. So definitely possible. So that was number 3. Number 4. Number 4 is human stories. And I probably don't have to tell you this. I mean, you're comms experts, so you know all this. But one of the things that I do, so this is a content creation boot camp, a virtual one that we did. And so I do them every so often, every few months. And we have content clubs and content creation boot camp. And this one, what I really did was focused on trying to help them to unpack some personal stories and not be afraid of things looking imperfect, and really focus on authenticity. So I thought I would show you one article that someone in our group created. And this is a lady, her name's Tracy Made. She's a business coach here in Brisbane. And she's really become really mindful of her stories, and she shares the stories on the run through her social media. And you can see this one. This is one she just put up the other day, where she said, does this make sense to you? I'm not going to name them because I still respect the work they do, but I recently have had some products made for some clients from a retail supplier I use. I had paid up front, but I was struggling to get hold of them in the timeframes on delivery. I drove past on Friday, and yeah, they had the door open a fraction. I jumped out and ran in to be told they were on holidays. I said, holidays? Now, is that a good time? Yes, they said, because if we earn too much more this month, we won't get the government grant. Now, I may respect the work they do, but I'm not crazy on this attitude. I don't get why you would just turn business away and take the risk of those clients going elsewhere just so you can get government funding. I would think it would make your heart sing to think that you would have such a great business. I didn't need government funding. This would make me feel bulletproof, and I'd know that no matter what life throws, I'm a survivor. So you can see the whole story. She's got it there. And if you look, most of the content she puts out, she has a lot of followers, and she has really super high leverage in her sales. I'm looking for, have they got enough authenticity to make their sales calls easy? In her case on this one, she had over 100 people like it, and almost the same in terms of the amount of comments. So if you want to have a look at Tracy's stuff, I would recommend having a look. I think she does this really well. She's probably our shining star in our community who does this super well. It takes a bit of courage to do it, but it's all about creating a safe space for people to feel vulnerable enough to do it, and it definitely works. So you can see it's not perfect, not formatted exactly right, but her community really get her and really tap into this. So have a look if you want to have a bit of a look at what she's doing. And there's no doubt about it, you know, really what we're tapping into is why storytelling matters is, if you would be familiar with Aristotle's principles, where he said we need ethos, logos and pathos being empathy to bring that storytelling and connection to life. So I'd really encourage you to think about whether it's yourself or if you're working with others to help them to unpack their content, is what space do you create to help people become vulnerable enough to be imperfect in the way they share content, and to be able to share their personal stories and see them as opportunities. That was number 4. Okay, we're doing well, Julian. So number 4 was stories. So number 1 was a tribe mindset. Number 2 was, what was our number 2? Gosh, my brain's gone. What do we have number 2? Capturing ideas, tribe mindset, capturing ideas. We had stories, and now we've got metaphors, or humanizing your content, and now metaphors. One of the things that's really changed the game, I think this changed for me, and it took me about 18 months to really get my head around talking and writing and communicating in metaphors. So I'm a pretty left brain kind of person. I work with a lot of left brain kind of people, but also lots of right brain people who naturally think in metaphor. I do find when I'm working with leaders in organisations, because there's often so process oriented, and we're focusing on systems and processes, is there's a lot of left brain engagement, and it can take a while for people to think in metaphors, but they have massive cut through in the way that we communicate. So I've found this is by far the thing that I find in the people I work with that they get most excited about when they're starting to communicate with and creating catalyst content, because it gets so much cut through. And so we do, and one of the ways we do it is we create metaphor buddies. So people who are really right-brained, we buddy them up with people who are left-brained, and they become, the left-brain people are good researchers and helping them come up with stories, and the right-brain people are pretty good at metaphors. This is an example of Renee. If you want to have a look at Renee's work, Renee is a leadership expert based in Melbourne. This was just a short picture off her Instagram. But in her content that she creates, whether it's content she puts in books, whether it's workshops, social media, her blogs, she's a fantastic cook. And one of the things that we do to help content come to life is to really tap into people's personal brand to make the metaphors connect. So Renee comes from an Italian family, you know, she shares these recipes, but there's always stories and lessons in her food and the way that she cooks. And she talks about culture, and she talks about, adaptability, and, when things go wrong, and all sorts of things. So her cooking is a big part of her personal brand. There's lots of other parts of her personal brand, but a big part of her personal brand is her cooking. So I really encourage you, if you're looking at your own content and creating content to drive change or helping others, is it can be a little bit vulnerable. People can feel a bit exposed sometimes, and they sometimes don't value it. Like they go, don't people they really want to know that? Maybe their parents, maybe they love traveling. There's lots of lessons to learn out of parenting kids and lots of metaphors in parenting. So don't be afraid to have a look at what are the metaphors as part of your personal brand. Like, what are the things you do outside of work, and how do they align with the messages you're trying to get through? And that's a big part of humanizing the content. All right, so there's our 5. So know your tribe, capture your ideas, leverage, think once, use often, use human stories, and tap into metaphors in particular using your personal brand. So I'm going to stop. I've also put here, if you want a copy of the first chapter of Catalyst content, it's just gone to publisher this week. So if you want a first chapter, you can jump on the link there and download. But I'll leave that up while Julian's going to tell me about any questions. How are we going? 2 minutes, he's told me to leave. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. So we're back on. I've got a question here. Can organizational culture impact on whether you do or you don't use metaphors?
It's a good question. My experience has been yes, in some ways, because it's speaking differently, and people at first can be afraid because they feel like if nobody else speaks like this, then don't I look a bit weird? And people have a fundamental need to belong, as you know. So first of all, I think it's a good insight, and I would say yes. And then our job is to work with the right people who are prepared to be courageous in the change and encourage them to have a go. Once they see it, it makes a massive difference, and their eyes light up and they get very excited. But yeah, it takes a bit of courage to have a go. It's a good question.
And one quick last one here. I find leaders in organisations, particularly in government, are afraid to be authentic in public spaces. Do you have any tips to encourage leaders to allow staff to share human stories instead of informing?
Yeah, great question. So we're doing this with a large global multinational at the moment with leaders. So we're working with leaders across APAC and the US, and I was a HR advisor in government, so I totally get what you're saying. So one of the things that works is you've got to create a tribe around that group of people. So what you're trying to do is create a new social norm for them. So to do it on their own, like if they're just doing a story on their own, could be quite hard. So the first thing I would say is even possibly create a small group. So quite often your intranet group architecture can be a good place to start. Create a small group with them and start a challenge. So don't put them out, into the ether and they feel a bit exposed. So I would create a challenge, start a small group, get them in a safe space where they can try some things, and then go from there. We actually had Julian in our community do that exact thing. So one of the things that I found was in my own community, they were scared of video. So I thought, okay, we'll do a challenge. I invited Julian in for a month, and he helped me run a challenge and gave them feedback, and it's been fantastic. So just to start to help them feel like it's a thing. This is a thing, and it works.
Thank you, Jane. Look, we're up on the half hour. Thank you very much. If you could give Jane some big capital C's, thank you very much. That's the way we clap here. Please just know that our next event is Bonnie Caver from the USA. Bonnie is an expert in crisis communications. Look out for the details. Thank you all, and have a lovely rest of the day. Bye now.